Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on October 19th, 2020, the committee is meeting on its study of the state of the Pacific salmon. Today's meeting, of course, is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House of Order of January 25th, 2021. Therefore, members can attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Given the ongoing pandemic situation, of course, and in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on January 28, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2 meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, included when seating. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. For those participating virtually, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. With the latest Zoom version, you may now speak in the language of your choice without the need to select the corresponding language channel. You will also notice that the platform's raised hand feature is now in a more easily accessed location on the main toolbar should you wish to speak or alert the chair. For members participating in person, and I don't believe we have any doing that today, so I won't go through this, but between myself and the clerk, we will try and maintain a proper speaking order as we go through. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And I would say during the questioning, it'd be great if members could actually identify who they're asking the question to, which witness, because sometimes it is a little bit confusing as to who should answer. Of course, with us here today, we have as an individual, Robert Hawkins. As an individual, we have Brian Riddell. And from the Coastal Restoration Society, we have Josh Temple. Mr. Hawkins, you now have 5 minutes or less, please.
Hi, I'd like to thank the Committee on Fisheries and Oceans for inviting me to make a submission. I'd like to first give a bit of my background in the salmon fishery. I'm a third-generation commercial fisherman from Prince Rupert, BC. I fished with my father and my brother on my father's boat. My father started fishing salmon when he was 14 years old. He bought his first boat when he was 19 and has proceeded to make a successful fishing business over the years. My brother and I started fishing as kids when he was 8 and I was 10 years old. We didn't have very much to do in those first years. It was more about spending time with their dad, though we did learn a lot during that time. When we each started high school, we fished the whole summer for salmon. Once we graduated high school, we both started fishing in the other fisheries my father participates in. We currently fish herring, salmon, halibut, and sablefish. I've been involved in trolling for salmon for over 30 years. I've seen how the fishery has changed over that time, from being open coastwide and able to retain all species of salmon during the summer to area licensing and being able to only retain certain species to risk-adverse weak stock management, which curtails the timing in areas that salmon can be fished for. Over that time, we've been involved in numerous charters to do DNA sampling on Chinook and coho salmon to help figure out the run timing of different stocks of Chinook and coho. Salmon fishing has always been an important part of our yearly income. Over the years, I've seen a slow decline in the income generated from fishing for salmon. My father has done his best to maintain a viable operation and has invested considerably over the years back into fishing. When Chinook salmon went to ITQ, we bought another northern troll license in area ATF because when the catch allocation was divided up, it was done by the average, and we have never caught the average in any year that we have fished salmon. It was not based on catch history or participation in the fishery, but by license. We purchased that license so we could continue catching the same amount of Chinooks that we have always caught. Over these last few years and the way the salmon is now being managed, it is exceedingly tough to generate the same income that we used to make. We've had to expand into other fisheries so we can make enough money to survive and pay our crew members enough that they can make a living fishing. I realize that priorities change over time and that what one government values can change with the next government. Fish and licenses are not property, they're privilege. At least that's what the courts say. But when you've invested blood, sweat, and tears into building a business, you shouldn't be penalized because those priorities have changed. Reconciliation with First Nations needs to occur. It, however, needs to be fair to everyone involved in harvesting the fish. What it doesn't need to happen is the systematic erosion of the commercial fleet under the guise of reconciliation. Canadians are responsible for reconciliation, and commercial fishermen shouldn't be the ones to bear the financial burden of that. Conservation can't only fall to the commercial fleet when there are numerous users and reasons why there are weak salmon stocks. Habitat degradation, pollution, runoff from roads, and residential developments are some of the contributing factors to the decline in salmon, yet there is no talk about restricting human development around salmon habitat, only less commercial fishing. There has also been no talk about accurate catch accounting from the other user groups, those being First Nation and recreational fishing. I believe that everyone has a right to salmon and fish in general, but that there should be legislation requiring credible catch accounting. There should be mandatory catch reporting similar to what occurs in commercial fishing. It is next to impossible to manage something if you don't have accurate numbers of removals. Also, the government needs to invest back into doing the proper science and stock assessments needed to manage the different salmon stocks. Right now, it is inflexible best guess where there is no in-season adjustment to the strengths of the runs appearing. They make a preseason forecast, and if the more fish show up than they expect, there's no increase in the available harvest, and the same goes for poor returns. They do not curtailing the fishing effort. Poor data makes for poor management decisions. I sincerely hope that the committee recommends investing in the science and monitoring needed to maintain salmon stocks for the future generations. I'd like to close that this testimony was composed Monday evening, April 12th, after receiving email Monday morning, April 12th, asking if I'd be able to appear before the committee on Wednesday, April 14th. While I appreciate the opportunity to testify, a bit more notice would have been greatly appreciated so that I would have had more time to prepare. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Riddle for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to be here today with the committee. Is the sound fine for everybody? I see nodding heads. Good, thank you. So my name is Dr. Brian Riddle. I have a PhD from McGill University and immediately came to God's country on the West Coast, and that where I've worked on salmon restoration, salmon conservation, fisheries management, and science for 42 years now. I am speaking today as myself, but I should declare that I am still employed by the Pacific Salmon Foundation as their science advisor. I do have a presentation that I provided to the committee, but I expect you have not seen it yet. You will see that in the future, and I'm only going to speak to the highlight of that today. The Pacific Salmon Foundation did speak to the committee last July in 2020. I do want to support that presentation, as there are, I think, lots of useful comments in there. The individual was Jason Wang, and I think that you really need to look at his key points for federal action as a reminder of what was said at that time. And fundamental point to me is that it's fine to talk about the state of salmon today, but we really have to think about how we act for the future. An important point he made is that we really need to be thinking about our community's welfare 20 years out for salmon. It's not a short-term turnaround and investment here. The summary points I want to make for you today is that summarizing the state of salmon is not simple. There are over 9,000 populations of salmon, and Mr. Hawquist made an extremely important point that the quality of our data is simply not sufficient. Whether it's catch or escapement or biological sampling, we are short on what we need. Sadly, today, the state of salmon is even poorer than what you heard last summer in the presentation. The particular point, as an example, is the return. The gold standard for salmon on the West Coast is likely the Fraser sockeye salmon. You may not be aware that the return of Fraser sockeye salmon in 2020 was the poorest ever recorded. And in 2009, when the Cohen Commission was caused because of the returns of Fraser sockeye salmon, our return in 2020 was less than 1/5 of the return in 2009. So you can't get much worse than that. right? So we have a very serious issue, and it is on the minds of many, many people on this coast, as you've just heard. I think that the Fraser sockeye is also exemplary of the difficulty in understanding the causes of the state of salmon. Fraser sockeye salmon rear in the streams and lakes of the Fraser drainage. They go through a highly disrupted estuary that in the city of Vancouver and peripheral areas. They then spend 2 to 3 months in the Strait of Georgia, which is what we call the near shore. They go past the Discovery Islands, which is obviously in the media frequently because of the state of the open net pen salmon farms and their transition. Then they go out to sea for 2 years and return. The abundance that we see on the return is the cumulative effect of all those factors. All of these factors interact. So we have a huge job when we talk about restoring the state of Pacific salmon and returning the abundance. In the presentation, I provided you with a life cycle diagram. You will all be familiar with the life cycle of salmon by now. But I think the main point I want to make here is that all the various habitats, they can interact to compound problems or they can compensate for problems. They all act independently, and there's almost never a single factor that causes a change in the state of salmon. So you do need to have the monitoring systems in place so that we can understand the good and the bad together. Unfortunately, the state today is generally bad. I use the bad term to emphasize the point. There are variations between salmon populations, but generally it has never been really poor overall. The challenge for us is, what do we do moving forward? I think what we're looking for now is that there needs to be strong leadership in acting to conserve these invaluable fish for British Columbia, not just for our Indigenous peoples, their cultures, but for our social well-being and economy in British Columbia, and for the BC ecosystems. Pacific salmon returns affect many, many different industries. We need a commitment of resources in order to act on this, and we need a persistent effort. This will not happen overnight. I provide in my summary five actions basically to help guide us. Ironically, we have a very strong policy statement that is the management framework to go forward. In 2005, we have the wild salmon conservation for Pacific salmon. It's a federal policy. It has not been implemented fully. In that policy, there is a guideline that you have to protect the diversity and distribution of salmon first. We do not know how extreme the environment will change or what habitat changes will occur. You can only plan by managing the diversity of the salmon to protect future production.
Hey, Mr. Riddell, I'm going to have to stop you there. We're going over the 5-minute mark. I do know that your testimony will be circulated to the members, and hopefully anything you didn't get to say will come out in the round of questioning. We'll now go to Mr. Temple for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and the esteemed members of the committee. My name is Captain Josh Temple, and I'm the Executive Director of the Coastal Restoration Society, a BC-based nonprofit dedicated to supporting wild Pacific salmon and the environment that they live in. I'm honored to join you today from the unceded and the ancestral territories of the Tloquit First Nation in what is currently known as Tofino, British Columbia. I am the son of Arlene Reese and the late Ian Temple, brother to Lindsay and Craig, father to Soleil and Caleb, and grandfather of Callie Temple. I'm speaking my family in these lands into this meeting as they ground me as a person, as a captain, and provide the framing for my understanding of the plight of Pacific salmon. I've spent my life guided by the movements of fish, in my case, a lifetime guided by the migrations of salmon. Born on the banks of the Great Fraser River Delta in the fishing community of Steveston, BC, on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh land, and raised on the western shores of Vancouver Island, I studied the habits of salmon and endeavored to catch them. I earned my captain's license while still a teenager, and began a lifetime of service as a captain, a commercial fisherman, and tourism operator. I did not know at the time, but I had begun a career in pursuit of a fish that was destined for trouble. I find myself in my later years not so much focused on catching salmon, but on ensuring that the family and people I spoke of have salmon to catch in the future. After years of witnessing the relentless decline of salmon, I created Coastal Restoration Society and dedicated myself to supporting salmon restoration. This committee is well informed of the causes that have contributed to the demise of the once prolific runs of salmon on our coast, and are appraised of the troubling fact that there has been little change in the trajectory of the decline. I do not appear before you today to beleaguer the point of habitat loss, pollution, overfishing, pinniped predation, aquatic invasive species, or the residual effects that coastal industries continue to leave behind. First Nations, scientists, and habitat experts have all testified before this committee and provided overwhelming evidence to support these facts. Instead, I appear before you today as a Canadian citizen, a fisherman cum environmentalist, to emphasize that these same people are already engaged in the fight to save salmon from extirpation and have been deeply engaged in this fight for generations. We have responded to the science of salmon decline with articulate and efficient solutions, with legions of dedicated restoration teams, hatchery technicians, activists, and the guidance of thousands of years of First Nations ecosystem management knowledge. We have created federal and provincial funding initiatives to support restoration initiatives, with thousands of collective minds focused on solutions and countless recovery and restoration initiatives underway. It begs the question, why are the salmon not recovering? The answer is clear. Salmon recovery is inadequately funded. With each intake of the BC SRIF or Coastal Restoration Fund, dozens of viable projects that will aid salmon recovery are left on the cutting room floor. Funding priorities shift from year to year, leaving critical projects to languish or die. One might think that the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been allocated to salmon recovery over the years would have succeeded in reversing the trend, but they obviously have not. The fact is that there are no bad projects, only underfunded ones. Mr. Chair and the members of this committee, if we are to meaningfully accept responsibility for the recovery of salmon, then we must hold ourselves accountable to fund the projects that have been identified as solutions for salmon recovery. We must acknowledge that we are on the right path, that our science and solutions are sound, but we fail in our attempts because we are denied the opportunity to deliver on the scope and scale that this solution requires. Without emergency funding on a scale that we have not received before, it is my responsibility to tell you that we risk losing salmon in our lifetime forever. I've spent my lifetime guided by the movements of salmon. As I get older, I am all too aware that where I am now is where I may have to stay should these movements cease. In closing, I ask that we recognize that all of us, First Nations, scientists, fishermen, government, and environmentalists, are working together to hold the line on salmon extinction. Please utilize the powers of this committee to encourage all levels of government to allocate emergency funding to stop the relentless decline of salmon and allow us to finally gain purchase in our pursuit and latitude in our movement. I deeply appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. 1 second to spare. That was perfect. We'll now go to our questioning, and we'll start off with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. Mr. Riddle, I'd like to start off with you if I could. Justice Cohen delivered his report in November of 2012, and the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative was established by the federal government 4 months later in March of 2013 as a direct response to Justice Cohen's call for more science and potential impacts on the open net pen salmon farming. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. When it was established, the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative was provided with a 4-phase mandate. Is that correct?
It was designed as 4 phases, yes.
Could you describe where the SSHI program is today and have those 4 phases that were originally mandated been completed?
We have completed the 2nd phase, which is a very large-scale data processing and analysis portion of the work. Phase 3 was to take the output of phase 2 and to direct experimental challenge facilities where you would use particular pathogens and subject salmon to that to see what the effect would be, whether it transmits disease, etc. And phase 4 is simply publication and advisory to government phase. Phase 3, unfortunately, is unable to proceed because we have not got access to sufficient space to do the challenge studies. The project did try to build challenge facilities through Vancouver Island University, and that failed for a very last moment for some reason. So basically, just today, we closed the program with Genome BC. We will have had about 62 scientific publications from it, but it will leave the uncertainty of certain challenge studies. In that study, we have found 15 new viruses that have never been recorded in BC salmon before. So it's been a very successful scientifically, but it leaves a number of significant concerns.
So it sounds like it was a success through the first 2 phases, but all of a sudden in the third phase, it's short of resources. Is that correct? To be able to follow through with the original mandate?
Yeah, it's not really, Mr. Arnold, it's not just resources, it's facilities that would take big resources. I mean, to do these studies properly, you require containment because they are pathogens. To proceed on phase 3 would be a very substantial effort to get going and would require quite a bit more lead time. So we simply don't have that available now.
So am I to take it that the program, the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative program, is basically parked at this time?
Basically, 2 weeks ago, we did an international workshop with fish health researchers and ecologists from around the globe working in salmon, in pathogens, and particularly with aquaculture. So we did a review there to limit the number of pathogens that we've been studying and try to get input from them about where they would put a priority on future work. And the intention of doing that is that we will have to find new facilities. But we've been studying 70 different pathogens over the years is what we've gotten up to. And we tried to get it down to 3 or 4 that are more important. So it can be picked up again, but it can't really proceed a lot further without more facilities.
Okay, thank you. In your view, has the SSHI's work determined whether or not open net pen salmon farms in BC pose more than minimal risk to serious health, or more than minimal risk of serious harm to wild salmon? That was one of the conditions in the Cohen report. Has it shown that they pose more than minimal risk?
Well, I mean, we have said this very openly that yes, we believe that the studies have demonstrated that. I would clarify that Cohen limited his comments to Fraser sockeye salmon. The comment would still apply to that. But one of our real concerns is that we have to be concerned about all Pacific salmon, not just simply Fraser sockeye salmon. But the answer to your question is yes, we believe that there's strong scientific evidence for a limited number of the pathogens, but is sufficient for us to say that, yes, they do pose more than minimal risk.
Okay, and do you agree with the assessments from the program?
Do I personally? Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to Mr. Temple. Mr. Temple, you've identified that there's many things affecting wild salmon. Are you active in the fight against aquatic invasive species and their potential impacts?
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Yes, as a matter of fact, we are. We have identified through our work as a society that European green crab is a significant threat to not only wild salmon habitat, but there is strong empirical evidence from both First Nations and scientific monitoring organizations that they're actually preying upon juvenile salmon as they exit their natal rivers and spend time in nearshore eelgrass habitat. Much work needs to be done to understand the evolution and the impacts of green crab here in the Pacific region. We are experiencing a tremendous outbreak here in southern British Columbia, particularly along the west coast of Vancouver Island. And I can say that over the past 14 or 15 months now that our society has been deeply engaged with coastal First Nations, the province, and DFO in the pursuit of a large-scale industrial response for management and control for green crab.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that have joined us today. Boy, oh boy, where to start? Actually, I'd like to start with Mr. Harkness. I understand that you had a very short time frame to prepare for this. This isn't a once and done proposition for you, sir. If you have other things that you want to offer us, make sure that you put them in a note to us and send them to the chair, and they'll make sure that we get that information from you. So, and while actually referring to you, the focus of this study is on the health of the stocks. When you have been out fishing, in the time that you've been able to fish, have you been able to catch fish? Are there signs that the stocks, when you are fishing, are good?
Yes, we're in Northern Troll license, so we're actually one of the first fleets to encounter salmon as they migrate back to their natal rivers. During that time, because of the way the management is on weak stocks, we have to forego a lot of opportunities. There is a fair amount of salmon that is out there that is available for harvest, but because you can't differentiate between different streams, it's very hard to persecute a fishery, which is why in the late 90s there was we did some charter work to try and do some run timing for the DNA sampling to figure out when those stocks are, because under the salmon treaty, we're allocated some Columbia River Chinook salmon to catch, and we wanted to see when the optimum time is. But unfortunately, there's Vancouver Island stock that's intermingling with that Columbia River stock as well.
What about marked hatchery fish? Do you encounter them?
Yeah, we counter marked hatchery, Chinook, and coho.
And now, do they represent a fairly clear opportunity to fish, or are they again intermingled with the other runs?
They're intermingled enough that I would say approximately 5 to 10% of our catch would be clip fin, but it's not enough to persecute a fishery on. And I would be hesitant about a catch and release, because you're going to encounter some mortality with the fish that you are releasing, and I don't like seeing that.
There's been, I think a number of comments over time, and we have come at this issue from a number of different angles. Not necessarily a criticism of the DFO, but certainly an observation that the DFO's work has been primarily around the management of the catch versus the restoration of the stocks. Is that your sense, just anecdotally, or do you actually, have something a little bit more fundamental to say about that?
I would say it's anecdotal, but yes, I would say they're more concerned about managing the stock and not really increasing the run sizes. They're more concerned about managing a declining number than they are about increasing those numbers.
Dr. Riddle, when we look at all of the various areas that we need to pay attention to, if we're going to set about restoring stocks, one of them, of course, is the Deep Blue Pacific. And my question, it is pretty easy to assume that there's not an awful lot we can do out in the Deep Blue Pacific to deal with warming waters, with acidification, with the plankton, et cetera, et cetera. That's an assumption, but is that assumption true? Are there some things that you've recognized, through your work that could actually be done in the deep ocean to improve the plight of the salmon?
That's a really good question, and I get asked that a lot. There's not so much that we can do to fix the ocean. The issue is climate change. These warm periods that we've had are clearly occurring more frequently. They're more intensive. The warm water that you speak of is not just warm, it's extraordinarily warm. It's 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above long-term average. That's something that no statistician would expect to see. All right, so these are strong environmental trends that are causing the decline, particularly of things like Fraser sockeye salmon. One of the reasons that we're seeing differences in different stocks of salmon and different species is they don't all use the ocean in the same way. So the very poor returns of pink, chum, sockeye salmon are because they are the open ocean residents. Coho and Chinook have different types of life histories and use of the ocean. So you can see better returns there than some of the others. But there is no question that we have to understand the ocean so that we can advise what we have to do to protect salmon in the future. But you're not going to change the ocean until we grapple with climate change.
Captain Temple, a similar question to you. You noted the invasive species, the green crab on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Would you be confident in attributing that, if you like, invasion of an invasive species to climate change? As well, are there other species that are coming up to prey on our salmon stocks and other fish stocks that we might not have seen prior to some of the climate changes that we've recognized?
Thanks for that question, Mr. Hardy. And I do want to preclude my answer with the statement that much further study is needed in terms of European green crab. We're very much at the preliminary stages of understanding not only the species and how it interacts with our local environment, but what's causing this rapid proliferation, especially along the west coast of Vancouver Island. But I will say that there seems to be a perfect storm of conditions that are occurring here in southern British Columbia, particularly along the west coast of Vancouver Island, that are contributing to the spread of European green crab. In areas to the south, in Washington, Oregon, California, for instance, where the species has been in existence for far longer than here in British Columbia, they are not seeing that same rapid proliferation that we're experiencing here, and we do not yet understand why that is. To answer your second part of your question about other species that could potentially pose a threat, that also requires further study. However, we are seeing large pelagics that are becoming more common in offshore waters like California yellowtail, and even billfish species like swordfish and striped marlin, other species of tuna like big eye, which could all, and bluefin, which could all potentially predate on some of the larger salmon or even the juveniles as they migrate through those more offshore waters. So it's very uncertain in terms of what to expect and the impacts that some of those larger pelagics may have on salmon, but it certainly should be considered a threat at this stage.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank our witnesses today. My question is for Mr. Riddle. From the beginning of the study, witnesses have talked about the difficulty in reconciling the conservation of salmon and the environment. What do you think should be done to truly reconcile conservation and preserving the salmon? These three levels.
Well, thank you. That's a very important question when we talk about restoration. The very first thing we have to tackle in British Columbia is water management. In BC, there is an act called the Water Sustainability Act 2014. It actually includes a commitment to minimum ecological flows. So the water is shared between the ecosystem and other uses. That needs to really be implemented as we get drier and drier summer periods and we get less snowpack, etc. And that the other element is that we have a long history of land use and alteration that has to be addressed. And then the third one that we very frequently forget about is that where the land meets the water in our estuaries, these are extraordinarily highly developed in many, many cases. And these are very important habitats where salmon have to spend up to even about a month where they adjust to salt water and they continue to grow before moving out to sea. So there are many actions that we know are important to salmon that can be undertaken. We heard Mr. Temple refer to the actions to take. There's the BC Salmon Restoration and Conservation, an Innovation Fund money. All of these things can be invested, but there's lots we can do in freshwater and estuaries before we worry about the open ocean.
Thank you, Mr. Riddle. Mr. Harkness, I'd like to hear you on the same question. What do you think can be done to reconcile the salmon population, jobs, and the environment?
The biggest question, part of that question is how to reconcile. There's so many user groups that all have a vested interest in salmon, and the pie is only so large. So I think we're in a situation right now where we just don't have enough fish for everybody to get what they want. We forego a bunch of Chinook because we have to let a bunch of Chinook go up the Fraser River and the North Thompson to get to the First Nations bands up there. So it's really a balancing act, and I think the biggest thing is just we need more fish, and how we get there is that's the hard question. But in terms of reconciliation, there is other bands that have northern troll licenses, like Port Simpson. They have 6, and you're impacting their ability to catch fish to reconcile with food social ceremonial practices up in the Fraser and North Thompson. So, yeah, it's a hard question to answer.
Merci des réponses.
Thank you for your answer. In your opinion, do you think that there is sufficient regulations in place to ensure the survival of the mass of the salmon population and to ensure the stocks survive?
I do think that there's enough regulations to ensure that they survive. But is that enough to maintain a harvest level on them? I don't know. I mean, that's a hard question to answer again, because what are your goals and objectives? Are you wanting to have a viable commercial fishery, a viable sports fishery, a viable First Nations commercial fishery, plus food social ceremonial, plus conservation? If you want all that, then probably not, because commercial fishing is kind of the scapegoat, and we're the first ones to get closed, and then it'll be the recreational sector as the salmon populations go down until you get to the point where you have no food social ceremonial because you're based on conservation. And I don't think we want to go to where we can just only have enough salmon in the river to sustain themselves and not be utilized by everyone.
Merci, M. Harkness.
Thank you. Chairman, can you tell me how much time I have left?
Seconds.
Excellent. Parfait.
Excellent. Mr. Riddell, then can you give me your opinion on the same question that I just asked with respect to the population of the Pacific salmon and the regulatory framework that's there? Is there enough in place to ensure recreational fisheries?
Well, I'm surprised with the final phrase. Did you actually mean recreational only?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Is recreational fishing threatening the commercial? Do you think what's in place is sufficient or insufficient?
No, it's sufficient. We have allocation policy. For example, the sockeye, pink, and chum are a commercial access. In the discussion about the northern troll, they are clearly focused on Chinook and Coho. There is a potential conflict with the recreational there over allocation and that, but in many cases, the recreational fishery fishes a much longer time over a wider area and that, and normally we have to build so that you have sufficient abundance for both, but they're not really in direct conflict if we manage them correctly.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for the important work you're doing on behalf of wild salmon. We obviously had the lowest return in the Fraser River, the world's largest salmon-bearing river. I can hear you, Mr. Chair, laughing, by the way. We had the lowest return in recorded history in the Fraser River. A year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. Then that was followed by what was now the lowest return in recorded history for wild Pacific salmon in the Fraser. The government hasn't made any significant changes to the investment outside of Big Bar. They didn't have a budget last year. They didn't table one because of COVID. In the fall economic statement, they didn't address this critical emergency. We've been asking for the minister to declare a wild salmon emergency because that's exactly what it is. Mr. Riddell, can you talk about how important this budget is, 2021, about addressing the wild salmon emergency? And you talked about what could happen next year, the next 5 years, 10 years, if we don't address this emergency immediately.
Well, I wish I knew what was in the budget on Monday. I hear that there's an investment in wild salmon, and I'm sure that will be very warmly received. Whether it's going to be adequate or not, I think is another question, because I actually don't know anyone that's had input to the development of that amount of money. The amount of money that is required has to be a long-term commitment, and it will be substantial. There's no point in really hiding that. You've heard examples from each of us about all the things that could be done and the problems. So there are many things to deal with. I'm a commissioner for Canada to the Pacific Salmon Treaty. So I deal with Mr. Harkness's issue about the allocation between different areas and the regulation. We have lots of great people to know what to do. The problem is we don't have great data. We need a commitment to really understand what's going on. We heard about the DNA sampling. We've been doing that for a long period of time, but it doesn't build on the abundance of salmon. We have to do other things. What we're finding is that the reliance on hatcheries is something we're going to have to look at very carefully, because I think the big unknown in salmon is...
On a point of order, Chair?
Monsieur le Président, simplement.
On a point of order. But there is no interpretation right now. The connection must be very weak. It's almost impossible to hear.
Okay, Nancy or Tina, could we check on that, please? I got the time stopped for now for a moment, just so as we can get this corrected.
Yes, would you like to suspend while we look into this?
Yeah, we'll suspend for a moment, yes.
Thank you. Oh.
Okay. I'm trying to think of where we really ended off or got to, but I think the real issue we have is where will we go with the money to build a future for salmon? We have to understand the expected effects in the ocean. Then we'll know how much we have to conserve and the breadth of actions we have to take in freshwater. So the question is becoming more complicated. It's not getting easier.
Oh, and I understand that and respect that, especially with the warming ocean. But the things that we can do, that humans can do, and maybe I'll pose this to Captain Temple. I mean, we've got this budget coming up. We know in our region that the BC Salmon Restoration Fund and Innovation Fund has just not been adequate. Like, we've had many applications go in, many been rejected, and these applications not only fund critical projects, but they actually help mobilize volunteers that we get that can get them out on and doing the important work. Mr. Temple, can you talk about what we need in terms of restoration alone? Because you've been doing that work. The NDP's been calling for a 5-fold increase of the BC Restoration Fund.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Johns. And I think it's important to note that the enthusiasm and the willingness and the science is all there. What is lacking is obviously the adequate funding to support the variety and the multitude of projects that we all acknowledge need to be completed. The question is where that money comes from. That's way above my pay grade. But I can say that, first we need to focus on habitat restoration, then invasive species control, and then potentially hatchery production, because augmentation will fail if the habitat is degraded, and we cannot ensure viability if that habitat is replete with invasive species. So it's a circle of restore the habitat, remove aquatic invasive species, and replenish via hatchery production if necessary, which it looks to be. And that, this pathway is supported heavily by science and proven by a highly successful localized salmon recovery projects. It's just a question of coming up with that additional pile of funding that we desperately need if we have any hope of meaningful recovery. Thank you, Mr. Johns.
You're on mute, Gord.
I believe, Mr. Temple, that wild salmon could go the way of Atlantic cod if we don't take emergency quick action to invest in restoration. Can you talk specifically as well about some of the partnerships that are developed on the ground and the importance of those partnerships to strengthen reacting to this crisis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Johns. I think it's important to recognize the importance of First Nations traditional knowledge here. As the original stewards of these lands, I think any partnership is set up for failure if we don't rely heavily on the guidance and information and traditional ecological knowledge of First Nations communities throughout the range of Pacific salmon. In conjunction with First Nations, we also need restoration organizations that have the technical knowledge that will complement the traditional ecological knowledge so that we can perform the type of large-scale industrial remediation projects that need to happen. You need science, obviously, for the myriad of reasons that scientific study adds to the effectiveness of the collaboration. And then, you need local community support. And finally, you need government support because somebody has to pay for it. And largely, a lot of the work before the BC SRIF and the Coastal Restoration Fund came into existence was a lot of that funding was generated from private individuals or within marine industries. Since then, the province and the federal government has stepped in tremendously. And I think that we're on the right path. However, I think we can all agree on the fact that more is needed to reverse the obvious trend, which is decline, decline, decline.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with Captain Temple. First questions I have for him. And it's in relation to the green crab and the delay that the SRIF funding that was applied for. I know from talking to folks like Ryan Chamberlain on his dock and the Sooke Basin, and I watched him capture green crabs, and there's no market for it. There are catch limits for these invasive species, and I'm just wondering, Captain Temple, if you can tell me what needs to happen in order to make the green crab problem manageable. Is it more SRIF funding? Is it more capture? Is there what are the things that we can do? And what are the real threats that green crab pose? My understanding from talking to folks on the coast is that the eelgrass is subject to being depleted because of these invasive species. Is that the only problem, or is there more to the story?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Calkins. That's a broad question, so I'm going to do my best to answer it as quickly as possible. First and foremost, European green crab are recognized as one of the world's most deadly invasive species. They're ecosystem engineers. They have proven their ability to absolutely reconstruct nearshore ecosystems, as is evidenced by what has occurred in the Atlantic regions of this country, where green crabs have been established for decades sooner than they became established out here in the Pacific region. They not only target very critical juvenile wild salmon habitat in eelgrass beds, but there's empirical evidence of them getting up into the rivers and digging up salmon redds to prey on the eggs as well. As I mentioned earlier in my first question and answer, they have also been identified on several occasions to prey upon wild juvenile salmon as they're leaving their natal rivers and spending time rearing in that eelgrass habitat as well. So very important that we understand more about how they are affecting wild Pacific salmon here in our region. In terms of what more can we do, I think that there's been a concerted effort from DFO Aquatic Invasive Species, DFO Science, Coastal First Nations, and NGOs like ourselves to truly understand how best to move forward and tackle the green crab issue. There are many unknowns that require concerted scientific study, but in reality, what we need to do to boil it down to its simplest point is get as many green crabs out of the water as quickly as possible. Now, we have to do that on a cautionary approach because we have to understand the best methods for industrial targeted trapping, and I think some of the progress that we've made over the last year and a half to understanding how best to proceed is going to be utilized very quickly. And I would just like to end on the point of, while we would like to see traps going into the water as quickly as possible, we do acknowledge that there has been significant delays, likely caused by the fact that Canada and the rest of the world has been in a global pandemic. And obviously that has taken precedence of keeping our citizens safe over and above anything else. But we are seeing significant progress. And hopefully we'll have some good news in the coming weeks or months about getting traps into the water as quickly as possible. Thank you.
So the willpower is there, the people are there, the capability is there. It's just a matter of getting the resources and the traps in the water.
That's correct. And I think that the support needs to come right from the top, from Ottawa, and trickle down.
You have my support.
Thank you.
For what it's worth. Mr. Temple, you did bring up pinnipeds in your opening statement. Given the political sensitivity of that nature and the fact that marine mammal protection legislation basically takes that part of the ecosystem out of the wildlife management portion of our ecosystem-based management approach, oddly enough, what advice could you give this committee and to anybody making a decision on the effects of, and how would we gracefully go about pinniped management for the ecosystem balance approach for preserving salmon?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Calkins. And I think we all acknowledge that this is a delicate issue, but we have to first and foremost depend on the science. And I think that the science has proven that the pinniped population is having an extremely detrimental effect on all age classes of salmon here in the Pacific region. And we perhaps may need to look to our cohorts in the United States who have already initiated pinniped control programs. It's a difficult decision, and we've seen that with caribou management and wolf culls to save what's left of the caribou in certain regions. And I think that as we move forward, tough decisions are going to have to be made. I'm certainly glad it's not my decision. However, I wish those that perhaps may be on this call and committee today the best of luck in making that decision, because it's going to be a tough one, but it is supported thoroughly by science.
Thank you, Mr. Calkins. 1 second left. Oh, time up. We'll continue on now with Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just follow up to Mr. Calkins' question. You referenced the U.S. was beginning to move on pinhead control. Could you elaborate on that a bit, Captain Temple?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morrissey. To my knowledge, for the last couple of years, both Oregon and Washington have engaged in particularly sea lion control in a number of rivers throughout Washington and Oregon, particularly, I believe, the Willamette and tributaries of the Columbia, where both California and Steller sea lions have proven to be highly effective at utilizing dam structures and bottleneck areas to prey upon both returning salmon that are coming back to spawn and juveniles that are out migrating as well.
So in the two, you identified the green crab as well as, and there's always been the reference to seal. Which of the two would be more detrimental to the salmon stock, in your opinion?
Mr. Morrissey, are you asking if green crab or in my opinion, which are more detrimental, green crab or harbor seals?
Yes.
That would be a question best left to science. That's punching above my weight class. I certainly think that they are both having a detrimental impact, but it would be impossible for me to quantify which could potentially, have a greater impact. I think that we don't know enough about green crab yet to make that determination, unfortunately, but we hope to soon.
But for the committee, could you then identify that the pinnahead control should be a part of rebuilding salmon stock?
I believe that if the sound science supports pinniped control, then we cannot turn a blind eye to peer-reviewed and proven science. And I think that these questions, perhaps if I could defer, would be best asked to Mr. Riddell, as his expertise far outweighs mine from a scientific perspective, but I do appreciate the questions, Mr. Morrissey.
Thank you. My next question, Chair, is to, I believe, Captain Harkness as well, or Fisher, Mr. Harkness. Could you expressed in your opening comments that there was a discrepancy in data collection between First Nation catch rates and commercial. Did I hear you correctly? Could you expand on that issue?
Yes. So in commercial fishing, we have a logbook that we have to keep, and we every fish that we encounter during that day is recorded in it. And when we get to the dock, that logbook is cross-checked against what has been unloaded, and we have to report that to a government agency at our expense. In First Nations and recreational fishing, there is data collection, but it is woefully inadequate on how much is actually being taken out. A lot of this food and social ceremonial fish is not recorded, and recreational fishing is not recorded as well. Like some lodges are doing their some data collection and passing that along, and there is with the recreational license, you do have to sometimes report. You get a survey and you do report what you caught during a month. But outside of that month, I mean, if I'm like when I went fishing in November, I got some prawns and stuff, and I had to report that recreationally. But then if I went out trolling for Chinook salmon in the summertime, there's nothing that says I had to report that. So my thoughts would be to increase the data collection so that you know what you're removing from the resource.
Okay, thank you. I may come back to that again if I get another chance. My next question would be to Dr. Riddell. Doctor, you made the comment that salmon stock, we can take about those preventive measures, land-based, that we control over habitat and various sources. But you made the comment, we have to understand the expected results in the ocean, because those are the ones that's going to primarily influence the health of the salmon stock. How essential is it to understanding the impact of climate change on the ocean as being one of the primary reasons for decline of these stocks?
Well, it's very, very important right now. For many, many years, the ocean was a very stable supporter of their salmon. We had many forecasting tools that were accurate to 10 or 20% of annual returns. Those are now out by over 100-fold. We actually have many that we don't use anymore. So, I mean, it's a big challenge, But to really be able to decide what's the best way to move forward, where to invest your money, you have to understand how severe the effect is in the ocean and where is this occurring. The best case example is we could address providing more hatcheries if it was just a matter of producing more salmon. But if you're producing salmon that are going to go out to the ocean and you know they're not going to survive, you'd be far better to take your money and invest in the diversity of habitat restoration programs throughout BC. Support the communities, do small scale hatcheries to restore community streams, just like Mr. Temple said, use the community people to get the number of spawners up. So the salmon has multiple habitats, but there's only one that affects all salmon, and that's really the ocean environment. So this is why it's becoming more and more important in people's minds about understanding it. And to be honest, there's a woefully poor understanding of the connection between climate, oceans, and salmon. We simply haven't put the effort into it. It's difficult to do. And Canada is not well prepared to do it because we don't even have a vessel that can go offshore fishing. We have a West Coast trawler, but it's part of Coast Guard. And so the Coast Guard can't allow it to go out to the Central Pacific. It can't get back if there is an emergency. And so the research we're doing becomes very expensive because we have to go and find vessels and the money to fund those vessels.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now welcome back Madam Gill. You're up now for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Riddle, but I want to thank all the witnesses who are with us today. It's a question is this. You talk about the climate and how it is linked to what is happening to the salmon. We know this is a very long duration problem, but what could be done on the short term to try to improve the situation?
Well, as I said in my comments, all of these habitats are interconnected. So if we know that we have a problem in the ocean, then we have to take additional action in the other habitats. Now, one common feature is that salmon go through estuaries. So restoring and preserving our estuaries could do a lot of good. We could mix that with the sampling for green crabs that we've talked about and removing those. The big question then gets to water management and what do we do in the terrestrial habitats. So there's a huge diversity of actions that could be taken there. And the problem with that is not that it's not worthwhile, but you have to take enough action in a place to really make a difference in the survival of the salmon. And so the idea that we have a huge diversity of activities is good for community engagement. It's great that way. It's good to support First Nation communities throughout BC. It may not net sufficient benefit to a particular salmon stock to really increase the numbers. So these are the difficult trade-offs we're going to have to make. But there's lots of actions that we can take through the communities. Just like Mr. Temple said, the Pacific Salmon Foundation works with 345 recognized community organizations in BC that are all capable of doing good local work.
So thank you, Mr. Riddle. So if I understand correctly, you have given me some measures, but these are not measures that would be of long duration. They would be of shorter duration. Really to solve the problem is money from the government. And that would be from the very basis what would be needed.
Well, the money from the government could be seen as seed money too. In many cases, we work with community groups where the foundation will only fund 50% of the work. You would be amazed at the power of communities to raise money. So if you enable them to get started, provide them the seed cash, they can do a lot of work. They can get donations from forest companies for planting. They can work with different groups to restore shorelines. We can do work in estuaries. We have First Nation communities on Vancouver Island who are actively restoring the vegetation in estuaries and removing old boats. So there's lots of work that can be done, but there is a need for the seed money that we've all referenced.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Mr. Riddell, you talked a lot about the interconnectedness. You talked about climate, ocean, salmon. There's a huge debate, as you know, that's surfacing in the Salish Sea and throughout BC, really, around herring. And the government hasn't done a great job, from my understanding, of looking at interconnectedness of various species, especially the forage fish. Can you talk about the government's efforts and what you think needs to be done around research and science around this issue?
Well, it's not just herring, Mr. Johns. As you probably know, there are many different species of forage fishes. Herring is without question the most abundant. Our understanding of what we call the dynamics, what determines the abundance of herring recruitment in any one year. So I think there are people working on that. We're even now talking about means to restore past herring spawning areas by moving spawn around to increase the distribution of it. But there are others like sand lance and other species like oolakan. We're addressing that by changing the shoreline from cement and big logs. We're putting it back into a natural setting so that you restore the beach dynamics and you restore all of the spawning for these forage fish. If we were to increase the abundance of forage fish, it's quite possible that we could greatly reduce the predation on juvenile salmon by seals in the Strait of Georgia. The preferred food of seals is not salmon, but they will eat salmon when they're present. They would rather consume herring.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that response. And around salmon farms, you talked about salmon farms. We know the Liberal government put in their mandate letter. Actually, they made it a campaign promise in 2019 to move away from open net salmon farming. Obviously, we've got issues related to sea lice pathogens, escapes, now mouth rot, die-offs. Do you believe the government's fulfilling their mandate and their promise from 2019? And do you think it's clear what they're doing?
Well, I think the intention is clear. I think it remains to be seen what exactly is done. Mr. Beach obviously has the pressure of proceeding with that one shortly. If we proceed by moving to more closed containment, then I think you will obviously reduce the interaction, and that will be beneficial to wild Pacific salmon.
Do you see the sense of urgency right now for the government to act?
Well, I mean, I think as you've heard, there's a sense of urgency about wild Pacific salmon everywhere. It's not just about salmon farms. There's a very broad concern. Throughout the Central Coast, we have very poor pink and chum production. That's not salmon farming, but they're just as concerned as the people in the southern BC. So we can't get overly fixated on just one problem. There are a number of populations that all merit restoration.
Thank you. I think, do I have more time or am I out, Mr. Chair?
Your time is up, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Mazier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for coming out this afternoon. Mr. Riddell, Dr. Riddell, I just wanted to pick up on something you mentioned earlier. Did you say that there was no one, to your knowledge, had been consulted on the funding for Pacific salmon in the upcoming federal budget?
Well, I hope that's not true. What I said is that I'm not aware of anyone who has been directly engaged in any of those discussions. I was with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for 30 years as one of their lead scientists and I, under the Salmon Foundation, talked to people throughout BC. So I have to admit, I was just saying to people yesterday that I am a bit surprised that I haven't heard about consultation, because this could be a big, big effort. And as I said very clearly, many, many people are concerned. So I sincerely hope that they have consulted widely with First Nations and other user groups. I just had to admit that I simply don't know any that have.
Is that a symptom? Like, I mean, I guess it is pretty concerning, right? Like, I guess we just don't know. We'll wait till Monday and see what happens here then.
It's certainly a concern to me, yes.
Yes. Okay, you've all alluded to the importance of moving quickly on restoring Pacific salmon. Mr. Temple, do you believe that the government has delivered on its promises to do so?
I believe that, first of all, thank you, Mr. Mazer, for the question. And I believe that the government is doing a lot as First Nations, ENGOs, the province, various departments in the federal government. I believe that they're doing a lot. I believe that a lot of money has been spent on it, but I'm a firm believer in the science delivering the proof, and the proof in the pudding is that these numbers throughout their range of Pacific salmon numbers continue to decline. So I think the question is, are they doing enough? I think if we were doing the right amount, the trend would reverse. So I think everybody has a responsibility to do more, not just the federal government.
So if the government were to continue on this path we're presently on, where do you see the state of Pacific salmon in the future? Like this path is leading to somewhere, right? So
I think that without some emergency action, there's only so much further the numbers can decline before we're talking about mass extinction. And I think that we're getting very close, as I've witnessed here in my own nearby watersheds in Clayoquot Sound. Some of them are not seeing any salmon returning anymore at all. And I think that that is indicative of many of the small streams throughout the province, and certainly some of the larger watersheds are getting very close to that red line as well. So I think that without emergency measures and funding and action, that, as I said in my opening statement, that we could see the extinction of salmon in my lifetime on a large scale.
Wow. Mr. Riddell, you mentioned in your previous remarks the importance of collaboration in federal and provincial governments in restoring the Pacific salmon stocks. Do you believe that there's been enough collaboration from the federal government?
Enough collaboration just from the federal government? Because that seems to be a little at odds with the notion of collaboration, and that there has not been enough effective collaboration with the province of BC. Right, because the province of BC has responsibility for freshwater and the landscape, forest practices, mining, et cetera, right? So you almost can't separate the two. So they have to work more hand in hand. I think the opportunity for collaboration is huge. And that, I mean, you have people everywhere concerned about salmon. It's not just the Mr. Temple on the West Coast, the small communities there are greatly involved. North Coast, I started my entire career up in Prince Rupert, and that complete dedication and First Nation groups there. There's lots of people that have the capability to collaborate and work on these projects. But we need a large-scale effort in order to, as I say, avoid just picking and choosing particular areas. We really do need a wide distribution of programs.
Have you seen a shift? Like besides COVID and all that, have you seen this federal government take a shift for the better or worse, or how is that collaboration with the province? Obviously, all levels of government. Have you seen the collaboration work differently in the last 5 years?
Well, I think the group that we're talking about, BC SRIF, so this is the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund. I think it was a third or 40% provincial and the balance federal. So that's a collaboration. That's a major step forward. I hear rumors in the province that there will be a BC SRIF 2, so there will be a continuation of money there. That's another strong signal. Is there greater collaboration in projects? Not unless we really go out and dig for it. So we still build a number of science programs. We're doing a lot of work in nearshore development and so on. But you have to go out and build these collaborations. There are still big silos, as we used to talk about it. But the collaboration within the government, the federal government alone, Environment Canada, climate change versus DFO versus Natural Resources Canada, it's difficult to get these parties to work together. So it's not just groups outside the federal government. There's lots of opportunity to improve inside.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Masier. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to split my time with Ms. May because I know she always has a great question to ask. And I only have one question, and it's going to go to Dr. Riddell. But I'm also going to give Captain Temple an opportunity to subsequently give us his feedback on this. Interesting number that you had, Dr. Riddell. 345 different groups that the BC Salmon Foundation work with. I would imagine that there are many, many others that are out there between government agencies, non-government agencies. Do you get the sense that anybody has got oversight over the whole landscape to coordinate and maximize the efforts and the money that are going into all of these individual organizations so that we're actually cumulatively getting the best value out of their efforts and the money that we're putting in?
Well, to be honest, 345 is enough for us to work with, to be honest. I don't have any doubt that you could increase that number. We actually have a fixed number for a reason, that we manage money for them.
Yeah, so but my question, I'm sorry, Dr. Riddell, but is there coordination? Like, is there somebody looking and saying, look, we've got these people doing this, these people doing that. Are there gaps in what's happening? Like, are we covering the landscape properly with the resources that we're doing right now before we think about throwing more in there?
Oh, okay. I'm very sorry. I missed that. That's a very, very important question. And to be perfectly honest on this, I have personally said no to that several times. There is not adequate planning under restoration. So when we provide funds, we do not go out and solicit programs. We fund programs that are offered to us to support. So an offering from a wide variety of people does not necessarily build a coherent program, right? And so that's why I think that we need to have, the money is great. I have full faith that these people deliver on good value for money, but we can benefit them much more by building a plan that they can then work together on.
Appreciate that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. May.
Go ahead, Ms. May.
Thank you very much. And Chair just flagged me when I should stop. I want to go to Dr. Riddell. I want to thank all the witnesses. I wish I had a bit more time, but I'm grateful for what I have. Dr. Riddell, the figure that you mentioned that really laid me flat was a 3 to 4 degrees Celsius average over the long-term average increase in our water temperatures. That's related to, at this point, a 1 degree Celsius rise in global average temperature increase compared to what it was before the Industrial Revolution. We're on track right now to go to 3 to 4 degrees globally. If the water temperature is already 3 to 4 degrees higher than our global average, I wonder, do you know of any science that anyone has done that suggests salmon can survive even if we hold the Paris target of 1.5 degrees or as far below 2 degrees as possible? This is terrifying information.
Well, I feared your question, Elizabeth, but I think it's a very astute one. Now, let me be clear. The 3 to 4 degrees these are the maximum range, right? When you see the maps of the ocean, there are varying colors of intensity. But if you have extremes to that degree, the other water is pretty warm, certainly more in the range you're talking about. But you bring up a very important point. So we have all these projections. We have global models. We have very little predicting what we're likely to see long-term in the ocean. Now, the ocean is highly dynamic. Even the Pacific has multiple different currents, and the salmon all use them in different ways. So we actually are putting a large-scale program together under the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences and Sustainability. And our project is exactly what you just said. We want to build a program that links climate change to ocean impacts, to fishery resources, and back to BC's communities, because the communities ultimately are paying the price, right? And we can do that in salmon. They provide an ideal opportunity to do this work. But that work in the open ocean over multiple years will not be cheap. But I don't think that we can do it.
If we use a decade, Dr. Riddell, aren't we out of time to find on what we know from the IPCC 1.5 degree special report without deep cuts? And I take my friend Gord Johns' point that this isn't something that we can control, but it is. It's the faster we go off fossil fuels and restore sequestration, the faster the opportunity to hang on to a livable marine environment for our salmon.
But I don't think you'll lose salmon in a decade in any sense.
Okay.
I mean, we're going to lose some here and there possibly, and with the bad habitat. They're highly resilient. They're very flexible in their use, and that it's a huge area out there. You can't believe how big it is until you try to go out there. All right. But the problem that I think we're identifying here is, and it's one that we are simply not addressing, is your question. how much impact is climate change going to have on our oceans, and then relate it back to our fishery resources? Those are the questions that I think we really have to struggle with now.
I'm sure I'm out of time. I wish I could ask Captain Temple a question. I just want to thank all of the witnesses for their concerns and bringing them to us.
Well, there still might be a bit of time later on, Ms. May. Hopefully someone will give you a moment to ask another question. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Riddle, I'll come back to you again. Last September, DFO released the 9 Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat's assessments that examined the various pathogens and concluded that they pose no more than minimal risk to wild salmon. Do you agree with those assessments? And if so, why or why not?
Well, unfortunately, we do not. And now I say we in the sense because the Pacific Salmon Foundation has written a response to that and provided it to the department about our concerns about the 9 assessments. And the one very obvious one that's not done is sea lice. Sea lice has not been under any sort of review since 2012. So we have almost a decade of more knowledge on that one. Our concerns are both statistical and, how do you define minimal harm? Your definition is surely going to differ from my definition and everybody else's. So we have a fundamental problem in how we actually assess these things. But we have documented our concerns about the PRV paper, about the Tenacibaculum paper, about the absence of sea lice. And the assessments don't even consider the cumulative effects of these things. They seldom act on their own. They don't consider the ecological effects. Something that comes from is VHVS, which is a virus from herring to salmon and back to herring. And that's a perfect example of our concerns about the farms amplifying bacteria and so on.
Thank you. And continuing on, in 2012, Justin Cohen identified the need to reduce pollutants affecting wild Pacific salmon. Mm-hmm. And in 2014, the federal government delivered Canada's first federal minimum standards for wastewater treatment. Last summer, the current government began a process to defer the deadlines for implementation of wastewater standards. How much do you feel that waterborne pollution is affecting Pacific salmon, especially in the estuary areas and so on?
To be honest, Mel, that's one that's not really well documented in Canada. I mean, we have lots of information on water quality. I don't think it's actually as serious as many other factors. I'd be more concerned about the continued habitat loss in the Fraser Estuary, for example, and that. But some work in Puget Sound under our Salish Sea Marine Survival Program has clearly demonstrated that there are particular pollutants that do reduce the survival of Chinook and coho salmon. So there are programs, and DFO is acting on this now. They are reinstating various programs about contaminants in the Strait of Georgia. And that, so I don't know that we have great current information. The department is acting to improve it. And I think it's something that we'll have to deal with as we go forward. It's going to be an element of the component, but I don't think it's a major component right now.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to Mr. Hockness now. Mr. Hockness, how much or how many salmon would you say an ordinary commercial fishing vessel would land in BC?
Well, it's really dependent on which gear type you're using. A seine vessel could catch as much fish as I catch in one set. So it's really dependent upon what species you're targeting and what pressure they can withstand and what type of gear type. So if you're just asking what I catch, we usually catch around 1,000 Chinook a year and probably around 4,000 to 5,000 coho, and then somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 6,000 pinks.
Okay, thank you. In 2016, the federal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans visited Vancouver and promised British Columbians that the government was restoring stocks of the Pacific salmon. We're now 5 years later. Would you say that the government has restored Pacific salmon stocks?
I wouldn't necessarily say that they've restored it. They might have restored certain populations. But in general, what I can harvest, we haven't seen an increase.
Okay, thank you. Could you give an indication of what kind of investment would be needed, capital investment would be required for a new entrant into BC's salmon commercial fishery? And if anyone is interested in that, given the condition of salmon stocks currently?
Well, for a northern troll license, it's approximately 160 to 180,000, depending on the vessel length. A boat is anywhere from 100 if you buy an old wood boat to 500,000 for a nice fiberglass boat. So you're looking at probably in the neighborhood of 450 to 700,000 if you're like getting a vessel that can fish multiple fisheries, because you can't just fish salmon anymore, unfortunately. So you'd have to purchase into, you're probably looking at $750,000 to actually have a somewhat viable fishery or fishing operation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to share my time with Ms. May. I have one question for Mr. Hawkins. You referenced that the way the salmon fishery is managed has changed. I want you to elaborate on that. And at the same time, you said the department is managing a declining stock, not they should be managing to rebuild. So if you could briefly explain to the committee, and then I'll give the rest of the time to Ms. May.
Okay, I'll try and summarize it fairly quickly. Before, you used to have one license that would allow you to fish from the Alaskan border to the Washington border. Then they went to area licensing. So the North Coast from Pine Island north is one area for trolls. West coast of Vancouver Island is one area, and then the Salish Sea is another area for troll. Sains have two licenses, north-south, Gillnet's Fraser River, North Coast, and then I believe Vancouver Island. I don't Gillnet, so I don't. But they went to different areas. So if you wanted to fish all the areas, you'd have to buy 3 licenses, stack those licenses onto your vessel. Then they've now gone to weak management, which is you're even restricted further by fishing areas. Like when we have a Chinook opening, we're only allowed to fish from Tayan, which is on the west side of Haida Gwaii, and the top end of Dixon, or most of Dixon entrance. So it's a very small area that we're allowed to fish in now. As far as managing declining stocks, we don't really see an increase in the fish that we're allowed to retain. It just seems to be further restrictions on the ability for us to harvest fish. So that's why I would say that they're managing a declining stock, because if there is more fish available to be harvested, then you would see an increase in the commercial allocation, which we haven't seen in a significant amount of time.
Ms. May.
We'll go to Ms. May now for the remaining 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank Bobby. I think, like all British Columbia members of Parliament and many British Columbians, we have a rising sense of panic that the salmon is in, as Gord Johns was just saying, is in crisis. We need to think about doing things differently. I've already made one key point about where I think we need to go on the climate crisis. But I want to ask Captain Temple, Dr. Riddell, and if we have time, Robert Hawkins as well. Do we fundamentally need to do something as dramatically different as dividing DFO in half and having a minister for the West Coast fishery and a minister for the East Coast fishery and some combination of them to deal with the Arctic? Captain Temple, what would, if we could radically reform the way we are managing salmon, as you were saying, headed towards extinction, what would we do?
Thanks, Ms. May. I think that regional management is critical because of the diversity of habitats and unique situations that each habitat and watershed face. I think that regional management is key. It's critical. As Dr. Riddell alluded to before, there's a diversity of different problems that can affect both the marine environment and individual watersheds as well. So I think that it needs to be supported from the highest level, but I think that at the ground level in the local regions is where really that depth of knowledge occurs. And I think that that's where you're going to find the best chance of viable solutions coming from.
Okay. Dr. Riddell, if I have time to ask you the same question, if we could, does the structure of DFO work? What kind of, would a dramatic solution like that help, or is it really on the ground that we need to get this work done?
Yeah, I think we can work within whatever bureaucratic or bureaucracy system we have in place. We really have to have the commitment to the resources, and we can then develop the plan, just the way we just said with Josh, that you could have regional committees that really know their environment. The limitation to that, though, is that some of our problems are in the international waters of the ocean. The competition between different countries of producing massive amounts of pink and chum salmon, for example. So it's not as simple as simply changing the bureaucracy. We still have the same problems that we have to learn to manage, and we still need the commitment and persistence of resources over time.
Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair? Oh, to Mr. Hawkins, I just wanted to give you a chance to expand. If we're managing a declining stock and you're seeing less and less fish, is there any form of compensation that you think the commercial fishermen in your situation should be receiving because of other competing policy demands that reduce your access to fish?
I would like to see like a license buyback or something along that lines to compensate people that want to get out of the fishery. There's still too many licenses. There was a buyback. There has been a couple of buybacks in the preceding years. The U.S. government gave $30 million to buy up some troll licenses to reduce the impact on the coho salmon. But there is still too many licenses, and it would be nice to see the government whittle us down, I guess, to a viable number.
Looks like you got a baby crib in the background there. I hope you take good care of you and your family.
Yeah, it's just a newborn, so.
Thank you for that, Ms. May, and congratulations on the newborn, Mr. Harkness. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had just heard Mr. Riddle speaking about international waters. Perhaps he could expand on that, because this is something that we've heard a little bit less about in the committee. The cooperation with foreign countries. Thank you.
Well, it's an interesting question. Canada is a very, very small player in the hatchery production game. The massive programs in Japan and Russia and in elements of Alaska really produce 100-fold time more fish than we do. And that the problem is that the fish will mix in the ocean. So when we went out and sampled in the Gulf of Alaska in the winter, we had fish from Russia, the Yukon River, from Japan. And these fish really are highly migratory. And then there are many statistical papers, there are many science papers involving statistics that show competition between different countries' fish with our fish. And so if there is a limitation in food supply, which I don't know that is really demonstrated as well, it looks like there is actually competition between species and countries. The other international point, of course, is whether the illegal fishing at sea, which seems to now be coming back a bit and is a concern, but it's really a different question than the competition between salmon species.
Merci, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Riddle. I'd also like to ask the same question, the question that I asked earlier to Mr. Temple and Mr. Harkness. Do you have any priorities with respect to salmon? What would these priorities be in your each individual areas of specialization?
Merci, Madame Gill.
Gill?
As I mentioned earlier in one of my responses, certainly starting with habitat restoration would be the top priority from my perspective. You can't plant, to give an analogy very quickly, none of us would expect to plant a productive garden if the soil was contaminated or full of rocks. So, we have to look at the garden first, and the garden for salmon, as I understand it, from First Nations perspective, is not healthy at all, and we know this to be true. We have to first rehabilitate the habitat if we can expect any meaningful chance at recovery. And I'll leave some time for the rest of the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you again to all the witnesses for your important testimony. Captain Temple, can you speak about how important it is for COVID-19 job recovery for coastal British Columbians restoration work is, and the opportunity that it presents right now, given the state of wild salmon?
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Yeah, that's a really important question, and one I hope that somebody would ask. And Mr. Harkness touched on this about what do we do with loss of economic activity through fishermen and through COVID-19 and creating jobs and creating meaningful employment opportunities and contract opportunities for First Nations and coastal communities through this type of restoration work, particularly in coastal communities that have suffered so greatly from losses of fisheries opportunities and forestry, is critical to rebuilding our coastal economies. And I think that it's kind of a two-pronged approach. Not only are we making meaningful progress in aiding the recovery of salmon, but we're also creating very much needed jobs, and particularly in remote coastal communities here in British Columbia that have suffered so greatly through not only COVID-19, but the loss of access to productive fisheries and forestry and other such industries that we used to traditionally depend on here in the coast.
You touch on a little bit about the importance of the partnerships that you have with Indigenous communities and how the local Indigenous Guardian programs, for example, could be mobilized to do some of this work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very large aspect of our fundamental philosophy here at Coastal Restoration Society to support local First Nations in any of the projects that we work with. And really with sometimes tens of thousands of years of traditional knowledge in these local environments, there is no better source of information and science to turn to in terms of how best to manage our local resources over time. And I think that if we can somehow find a way to collaborate more effectively between First Nations by utilizing their Guardian programs, by utilizing their hereditary leadership and their traditional ecological knowledge experts, and marrying that with our more traditional Western science and leadership and management perspectives, I think that we are going to achieve far greater results than we have seen in the past. And I think that that is a pathway that we all need to endeavor to engage, to walk together on.
Super.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Right on the button that time. That was great. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask questions of Dr. Riddell. We've met before, I'm sure you recall. And I want you to talk a little bit about, notwithstanding Captain Temple's assertions that it doesn't make sense to build up hatchery capacity without having the habitat in place. I think you and I had a frank conversation. Could you remind me of what your thoughts might be about the department's current, I'm not going to say attitude, but a word that might be synonymous with attitude towards community-based hatcheries, whether those hatcheries are there for scientific use, or whether they're there for stock replenishment or restoring breeding stock. Is the department actually respecting the knowledge of the local community hatcheries and using them adequately, or could that be improved?
Well, I think it could be improved, but I mean, hatcheries can have very different objectives. So the major hatcheries that the Salmon Enhancement Program has built were built to provide fish to commercial fishing. and to recreational fishing as they changed the species composition. They were not built to be conservation hatcheries, right? So community-based hatcheries can be very effective, just the way Josh referred to them as you can return some spawning populations by having localized community hatcheries. And maybe you don't do work in one stream only through the community. You could have several streams and alternating through time. So you really have to be clear on the objective of your hatchery before you really look at what's being done and what could be done. I think there's great opportunity in providing the diversity by using more community-based hatcheries. The pushback you get is that they do tend to be more expensive. Well, they can be more expensive because you have to have more trained staff, you have to have more widely diversified facilities and so on. Or you could build larger facilities again, but use satelliting, we used to call it, where you could bring different populations in and move them back out to their home stream. So I think we've learned so much about salmon genetics and physiology and genomics that we could use hatcheries in a much more directed way. And that would be different than just producing large numbers of fish.
Agreed. But moving to large numbers of marked fish conversation then, because your answer was a perfect segue into my thoughts. The several groups, whether it be sport fishing groups and others, are arguing that right now the Chinook retention closures and so on are having a devastating economic impact on some businesses on the West Coast, and they argue that they could move to a marked selective fishery right away, given the fact that there are so many marked fish in the system from outside of Canada. And Canada in that agreement only marks a certain percentage, a very small percentage of especially Chinook salmon. Do you agree that, or would you agree with their assessment that we should move to full marking of Chinook hatchery salmon and move to mark retention fisheries? And would that be something that would be viable, not only just for the sport fishing industry, but could that be something that we could get First Nations involved with not only the hatchery production, but also the retention for food, social, ceremonial on marked salmon, and almost run a parallel marked salmon versus wild salmon to protect wild salmon stocks?
Well, unfortunately, what we're talking about here really is a mix of biology and sociology and cultures. This is not a straightforward one that you should do this, yes or no. You could certainly do elements of this, and I have been promoting the consideration of mass marking because I think to sustain our coastal communities and to have viable tourism and recreational fishing, we need to provide opportunity. You can't just have closures because you're going to lose the resource, you're going to have the loss of infrastructure, et cetera. The decision has to be for the rebuilding of the natural populations that have conservation needs. Is there a sustainable level of harvest or mortality that could be sustained while you do that? And so you'll have to make a very explicit management decision that you will enable a limited mortality in order to sustain communities while you rebuild the populations. Rebuilding is not going to be overnight. Rebuilding is going to be, it could be 10 to 20 years. All right, so you have to have a long-term perspective about our communities as well, right? But it will have to be limited. It is not a panacea, right? So if we think that the allowable harvest is 5% of a return, and it could be that low, then you're going to be limited in the scale of the fishery that you can provide. But we can know these things. We can identify animals to their stream of origin and that, so we can do the assessments. And that it's a matter of how open we are to looking at a new way of doing these analyses and rebuilding. We need to think long-term. We need to think about wild fish, but we have to consider our communities, I think, to make it saleable in the long term.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Calkins. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Captain Temple, as you listen to Dr. Riddell's comments about hatcheries, you mentioned that there are streams and perhaps inlets where there used to be salmon and there aren't anymore. Could you visualize community-based hatcheries basically restoring populations to some of these waterways?
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Excellent question. And in fact, we do have community hatcheries in place here in Clayoquot Sound and in Barkley Sound that were set up to specifically augment runs that were in serious and troubling decline. Those hatcheries have been operating at a fraction of their capacity. Again, circling back to a lack of appropriate funding or sufficient funding. So these hatcheries are here. They're ready to go. You have the experienced staff that are in place, like Mr. Doug Palfrey here at the Tofino Salmon Enhancement Facility. The thing I hear year after year is that they're inadequately funded. So unfortunately, we're not maximizing them to their ability.
Would you? I'm going to put some words in your mouth here. Would you agree that sometimes it's not just the dollars that it takes to get an operation up and running? There are other considerations like the social, like the availability of food eventually when they come back. In other words, we shouldn't necessarily just be fixated on how much it costs to do something. We need to look at a whole range of essential elements that would make something like this really worthwhile.
Absolutely, and again, it harkens back to our reliance on dependable and thorough science, as Dr. Riddell would enforce, I'm sure. However, in the situations where we have a near or complete extirpation of salmon, there has to be some form of augmentation to restart or rekindle that run. And in many cases throughout the regions that I'm personally intimately familiar with, in the areas where I've fished and worked over the course of my career, there are facilities in existence that could easily contribute to the rebound of those systems, but they're suffering from a lack of funding almost in every case.
Dr. Riddell, back to you for a second. I want to go back to some of your earliest commentary. In the work that you were doing in the two of the four phases of that initiative, you mentioned that you were studying the arrival or presence of various pathogens in the salmon population. Do you have any sense of timing as to when some of those, may have all of a sudden become factors? And particularly, is there a connection that you could draw from the data between the arrival of pathogens and the arrival of aquaculture on the West Coast?
Well, we've only really investigated at that degree of detail for one virus, and that was the Piscine orthorhea virus. It's the one that's been in the media many, many times and related to the heart skeletal muscle inflammation disease. And that we have done the very careful genetic study of its origin, where was it from, and whether it's being exchanged with salmon farms. And that research is the basis why I answered a previous question that yes, the assessment of the Pacific Salmon Foundation and the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative is that there is more than minimal harm, and that the PRV virus origin comes from from the European Atlantic area. We believe it came over approximately 30 years ago, and that, by coincidence, does put it closely related to the development of salmon aquaculture. So in that one instance that we've been able to do this study, then yes, it does actually unfold in that way.
We heard in other studies that the Pacific Salmon Foundation has done an awful lot of work up and down the coast, and I believe it was the Nass River system that was the focus of a complete assessment by the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And based on, and if that is the case, if my memory is correct, what's the state of the runs in the Nass versus the runs in the Fraser River, given that the Nass certainly hasn't seen the kind of human activities that we've seen along the Fraser River?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to from PSF in the Nass. We've not done that.
Okay,
if there is,
it
was a very old review. Now, there are many factors involved with that, Ken, because the Nass Valley is also very much less developed.
Right.
So there's a huge difference there to start with. Unfortunately, the Nass does support the concern about climate change and changes in the ocean, because the productivity coming back to the Nass right now is depressed compared to their recent averages, with one exception. And in 2020, they had a very good chum return. This is the challenge of Pacific salmon, unfortunately. You do get these outliers all of a sudden that are really good or really bad. But overall, the Nass is very consistent with the Skeena, Southeast Alaska, Central Alaska, that there's a declining production.
Right, fair enough.
Thank you,
But I
Mr.
don't
Hardy.
think you can. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Their time is a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Major for 5 minutes or less, please.
I get that. I get you all set up. I was relaxing here. Just hang on. Okay, Mr. Hawkins, you mentioned the large investment it takes to enter the fishing industry. And I totally understand that, as I'm a farmer myself, but on the prairies. Can you explain what the impacts would be to Canadian fishers, such as yourself, and the surrounding communities, if the Pacific salmon stocks continue to decline?
Oh, it would have a devastating effect. A large portion of our income, our yearly income, is from salmon, and we support a lot of local businesses. Like this last year, we've spent probably $25,000 in Rupert just on assessing our doing our herring. We built a herring skiff, and then 2 years ago we put a new refrigeration system in, and that was done out of North Saanich. We put an engine in a boat that was done in Nanaimo. So in the last 3 to 4 years, we've spent a significant amount of money in local communities that just wouldn't be there. So it would be really devastating if like salmon's probably about half of our income a year if we didn't have a salmon fishery. So it would be devastating.
It'd be half your income, eh? So that's good to know. Where am I here? Mr. Temple, other witnesses have alluded to the lack of collaboration on the future of Pacific salmon. What do you think the federal government should do to improve communication and collaboration in relation to improving Pacific salmon stocks?
Well, I'm sorry, but I didn't really hear that myself in other witnesses' testimony. I'm a firm believer that the collaboration has been fulsome and that it continues to grow. I think that continued collaboration and enhanced collaboration between the federal government, the province, First Nations, scientists, academia, and ENGOs is critical if we're going to see positive steps in the recovery of salmon. So I apologize, Mr. Mazur, but I did not hear that perspective today.
Oh, okay. Because I guess it just, okay, that's good. And then as far as you did allude to commented on the impacts of aquatic invasive species to ecosystems and fish populations, particularly to the impacts of green crab to wild salmon. Do you believe that the current federal government has provided enough support for the AIS prevention and control in British Columbia?
Well, I wish you'd asked me that question in 2 or 3 weeks from now. I might have a better answer. Right now, we're still up in the air because some funding decisions have been delayed, obviously due to COVID and a variety of reasons. But we expect to hear, some dramatic progress decisions soon. And I do believe, from what I've seen over the last year and a half, being engaged in the green crab issue with both the province and the federal government, that significant attention is being made and put towards green crab, not only at the regional level here in British Columbia, but from Ottawa as well. But certainly, we'll get back. I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Dr. Riddell, I do have a question for you. You mentioned something about the tools that you're using in addressing the climate change and how we adapt to the changing environment. And can you expand on that a little bit? Like, what tools should we stop using, or is there something that it should be addressed in this changing climate?
Well, if there was a tool mentioned, I don't think it was about our chemical analyses that we're doing. I think it's probably more in the context of major hatcheries. And that, so major hatcheries are seen as a management tool. And as you just heard, they can produce large numbers of fish. But the intention of doing that is that you have a certain minimum survival. Therefore, it has a cost benefit factor that they go ahead and build a hatchery, right? So the issue is the environment the same now that as it was before? And it's not, all right? And so you have to think very carefully about how you're going to invest to do this. It may be the timing now is much more for small scale, diverse community hatcheries.
Have we adjusted the research enough to do that? I guess that's the question. Like, have you seen enough adaptation in the research community to adapt to that?
No, I wouldn't say enough to do the adapting. We have developed the tools that you could use, and now it's a matter of how you implement them. Okay. But there's not a great deal of additional money in the enhancement program where they want to spend more money.
Okay.
And so there's been slow take up on some of the real opportunities. But they have used some very new tools, something called parental-based tagging. And this is amazing. So in a hatcheries where you could maybe produce 10 million juveniles, you can take one individual from a pond and we can tell you its parents. Right. It's amazing what we can do these days.
Oh, good. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Major. We're gone out of time. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And my question, any three can respond to it. And could you clarify to an East Coaster? On the various panels that I've sat through on salmon, and the issue comes up on hatcheries. I interpret that there's a conflict on the advice given to government and to the department on is our hatcheries part of the solution as it relates to conservation versus commercial and both? Is the requirement to have a effective hatchery system a key part of maintaining salmon stocks into the future? Because at the same time, the studies will show worldwide that the oceans are not going to sustain the protein level of production that they have. The trajectories are all down. So am I missing something here? Do we need them? And can we maintain both the stocks with hatcheries?
Well, maybe I can start on this. I mean, I think what you're perceiving is correct. In the scientific community, there is very definitely a split. Recent COSEWIC decisions about West Coast salmon was that they really criticized industrial scale hatcheries. So these are the large mega hatcheries, not the community-based hatcheries. Right. And so the concern that they have is that these large scale hatcheries will produce large numbers of juveniles that will simply compete with the wild salmon that we're trying to restore. And that may not be positive. All right. The other side of the coin is that you can't just write off hatcheries, because we talk about in the West Coast with Josh that you can get down to very few fish in some streams. Letting that go is irresponsible, because all you're doing is what we would call a genetic bottleneck. You are going to inbreed that population. So what you would do is use a conservation type hatchery, maybe just for a short period of time, to restore some spawners in there to get the population production up. So hatcheries is becoming quite a polarized source of discussion. And I think it really depends on the problem you have and the tools you have available on how to address it. So your perception is correct. There is a difference out here. And it really depends on what your objective is and what to do.
Mr. Hawkins, as a commercial fisher, your perspective?
I would echo Mr. Riddell there, and but I would also say, like, as a commercial fisherman, that's my goal, is to have as much fish available to harvest. So on one hand, it is like you look up in Alaska and Russia with their mega hatcheries and how much fish they produce. and what we're producing here in BC is inadequate. But if you're trying to conserve the stock, you have to be cognizant of the fact that if you have a mega hatchery, it's going to impact the ability of those stocks that you're trying to recover foraging habits, because they're going to have to compete against those other hatchery fish. So I just like to see more fish.
Okay.
Can I make a quick comment
Captain
on that?
Temple? Oh, sure, Dr. Riddell.
I just want to point out that, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that we just heard there, except that when you talk about Russia and others, they're producing a different species in the hatcheries. So these huge numbers, they are not doing this with Chinook and Co. They have some hatcheries for those. We invested back in the early 80s. We used to have hatcheries designed to produce large numbers of sockeye pink and chum. And our program was changed to focus on recreational type fish, Chinook and coho. So the huge numbers that we see elsewhere are really not comparable to what we're producing. It's, again, a different type of set of objectives. Now, if you want to produce large numbers of fish that we potentially could harvest, and that, I think there's opportunity if the Pacific can produce them for pink and chum, where we have very successful chum hatcheries when the environment is good. We haven't done much in pinks. It's more of spawning channels. And sockeye can be too good. So our spawning channels there have different types of effects where they can have effects on the local populations because the channels can be highly productive.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. Your time is up. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Earlier, I asked Mr. Riddle a question about the impacts of other international fisheries on salmon itself. With respect to the studies that exist, to your knowledge, and my question is to Mr. Temple and to Mr. Riddle, Mr. Harkness as well, are there studies about what's happening on the West Coast for other species? Would there be any way of drawing some inspiration from studies done elsewhere to help us out on the West Coast?
Désolée, Madame Gill, on va vous interrompre.
We don't want to. It's very difficult to understand what you're saying, Madame Gill, because of your microphone's positioning. Oh, well, yes. Just let me repeat. Earlier, I asked if there were reasons why the salmon population on the Pacific was in such bad shape. And now I'm wondering if abroad the same thing is happening in Russia, in other areas of North America. Is there a similar situation, and are there studies that are underway? If so, can we draw inspiration from these existing studies? I know it's many questions in one.
Maybe I could start again, gentlemen. I think the best example is in Russia. They have a very large pink and chum hatchery program. In 2000, they lost 40% of their catch in 1 year. All right, so their hatcheries didn't change in any way, but the ocean environment was so much different that the fish returning had much, much lower survival. Your original question was about really interaction or mixing between different hatchery groups in the Pacific. If that is the case, maybe we'll see a little bit better return to Canada. My expectation from looking at many, many populations is that we will not, because there's a common factor in the North Pacific has been very poor for our fish and for their fish. And that, so once the ocean changes, it's pretty much unavoidable.
Okay, thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing, Mr. Riddell, you talked about international fishing. One thing that people have brought to our attention and has raised concerns about super trawlers and bycatch there as well, in addition to international fishing. Can you speak a bit about that, or is that a concern of yours?
It was a concern of mine, but I think it's a bit dated now, because the trawl fisheries that you're talking about on the effect in salmon, we're in the extreme North Pacific and in the Bering Sea. The Bering Sea pollock used to be the largest fishery in the world. It was highly productive, but it had an enormous bycatch of Chinook salmon, into the hundreds of thousands of fish. And so the U.S. puts very severe restrictions on their fishers there, so that they now have a quota of bycatch, which is around still, I think it's around 80,000, maybe Mr. Harkness knows. So once you hit that quota, the fishery is closed. So there's a huge incentive to not hit that quota. Every vessel has to carry a monitor, and there are films, and they report. And they do close the fishery when the quota is matched.
Appreciate
so
that.
I don't have a huge concern. It is an issue.
Great, thank you so much. Captain Temple, you talked about hatcheries. We talked about the lack of funding. I mean, we think about in your area, Tofino Hatchery, Thornton Creek, the Cloakwood have a hatchery out at Kennedy. They're on bare bones. Can you talk about how that's, impacting volunteers and the work they're doing?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Mr. John. So through my work with the local Clayoquot Salmon Roundtable, which is of course populated by First Nations, the province, DFO, ENGOs, fishermen, both commercial, sport, we understand very well the workings of the local hatcheries. We receive regular reports and updates on their progress and how successful or unsuccessful they've been on gathering brood stock and what their funding situations are like. And we know one thing to be true is that when the funding taps are turned off or are completely restricted to a trickle, the numbers of fish plummet in our local systems, because our local systems here, at least and the ones that the hatcheries, the local hatchery, community hatcheries have been working on, are highly dependent on the input from those hatcheries. And once the production and the funding is turned off, our numbers of Chinook salmon particularly plummet to either close to zero or zero. So without that funding that we talked about earlier, we don't have salmon returning to our local streams naturally in any meaningful way. We have small returns, but just in my lifetime, I've watched those returns go from numbers in the thousands to single digits. And without the hatchery work that is being done by these amazing teams and community hatcheries, we wouldn't have any numbers of fish left in our rivers at all.
Thank you. Do I have time for a quick question? I would like to give it to Ms. May, actually, if there's time.
If Ms. May can come up with a quick question, I'll let her go. I'll use the chair's prerogative.
Thank you, Chair Prerogative, and thanks to my colleague from Port Alberni. Quick question then to Dr. Riddell. Given the complexity and the multiple factors here, what would your most concise advice be for the Minister of Fisheries right now? Would declaring an emergency for Pacific salmon help us?
I don't think a new name helps. It really depends on the action. All right. We need the resources. We need the people. There's lots of people who will give you way too much good advice. And so you need people that really can sort out. A really good question earlier about, you could have 1,000 random projects that are all worthwhile locally. They don't add up to recovery. So you need to be thinking in terms of a bigger picture about how to effectively utilize taxpayers' money to restore salmon. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to be prepared for some failures. You have to study something in the ocean. I'm sorry to keep harping on that, but all these comments about things have changed over time. It's not because hatcheries are doing something different. It's because the environment's changed, or it's because we didn't sustain the local estuary. Campbell River, you built a marina on top of the most beautiful eelgrass bed I've ever seen in my life. All right, still didn't stop it. All right, that sort of thing can't continue. And that, I think if there's a way to improve things, it may be give the money to a group that's dedicated to restoration and do the best thing for it. Get a group that is going to build from knowledge, work together, gain experience, right? And include people like Mr. Harkness, that has a sincere need for income, but he understands the complexity of the fishery, right? There's lots of people that'll give you time to do this work. But we have to do things a little differently. A friend of mine says if you don't look at what you're doing, you just keep doing the same old thing. It's not a very wise management if it's failing.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Ms. May. I want to say a special thank you to our witnesses today for appearing before committee and sharing the wonderful knowledge that they've shared with us as a committee today. It's probably one of the most insightful that we've had in a while. I will remind committee members that, of course, there is no committee meeting on Monday due to it being budget day. And I will say that on Wednesday, of course, the first hour will be the final version of our moderate livelihood to get that finished. And the second hour will be dedicated to strictly committee business. So if we get through a little faster in the first hour, we'll have a little bit more time, of course, for committee business. I want to say thank you to the staff, clerks and analysts, and of course the translators for putting up with us this afternoon, and wish everybody a wonderful evening. And I'll see some of my colleagues tomorrow, and we'll see the rest of you back at committee, of course, on next Wednesday.
Love from the Salish Sea out here. Bye, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Meeting adjourned.